or yeah, affordable housing providers, I guess. The corporation type can vary. And these come from cities, usually. In our case, that's usually who we're getting public money from. But there is also money for affordable housing development at the county, state, and sometimes federal level. The way you access this money is through application. So a city will put out what's called a NOFA, Notice of Funding Availability, or they'll put out a request for proposals, an RFP. The other way that you can get this money that is less straightforward but is available to you year-round, whether there's a NOFA or an RFP out, is that you can work with your representatives and you can go to government bodies like the Housing Advisory Commission, you can go to City Council, and you can try to make a specific request for money that way for a specific project. The terms for public money are really favorable. They make this money really, really affordable. The interest rate is 3%. This loan comes to you for 55 years, and it's often rolled over after that, or it can be renewed after the 55 years. And instead of repaying the principal and interest, you pay in what's called residual receipts often. So this means once you've gotten all your rent income and you have paid out all of your expenses, you've repaid you've made your debt service payment on your commercial loan, the cash that's left over, you have an agreement with the city about how that will be split. And in the example, I'll show 50% of that residual cash flow goes back into the project, and 50% goes to the city. This means that if for some reason your expenses were really high or your income was really low and there was no cash flow, you don't owe anything to the city. So it's it's much more flexible than a commercial loan. This is one reason that it's called sometimes soft debt, and the long-term and often renewal of the loan is why it's sometimes referred to as permanent financing. The important limit that we're thinking about with public financing is the per unit subsidy. Cities, whether there's a NOFA or it's an informal or request for funding going through a city council or something like that, cities are going to want to know how much money they're paying per unit and often have a cap that they're comfortable with or an explicit cap in the NOFA. So those are just some things about these three types of financing.
Miranda, there's a few questions before we move on.
Great.
So the first one, when converting into a tenant-owned co-op, could security deposits be used to help with down payment for the buildings or funding for the buildings?
When converting to a limited equity housing cooperative? Is that what the question is?
Just a cooperative in general.
Yeah. Security deposits are not something that's in the pro forma that I've developed, that I have worked with, so I don't know about that.
And the next question, can you say a little bit more about the debt service coverage ratio?
Yeah, I think the best way to talk about that will be to look at the pro forma together, and I'll be sure to go over that more.
Great.
I guess, sorry, the question about security deposits, I would imagine those would go into a replacement reserve or an operating reserve. So that money gets held in case something is damaged. And I think wouldn't be used to pay debt service or something like that.
Yeah, and then there was an answer in the chat that California law limits security deposits on housing to 2 times the monthly rent. So it's limited, the amount of money that would be available.
That makes sense.
And then can collective models apply for these public funds, or are they specifically for affordable housing developers? So
the most recent application that the city of Oakland put out allowed applications from cooperatives and community land trusts. So if your group of tenants had formed a housing cooperative, like incorporated together, you could, from that entity, apply for the funds, I'm pretty sure. But individual, like unincorporated individuals, I think can't access public funding. And I think the vast majority of public funding goes to organizations that are nonprofit organizations with experience in housing development. But there's opportunities always to partner with CLTs like NCLT, BACLT, to partner with EBPREC to get your project done.
Can I make a quick comment on that too?
Yeah.
Hey all, this is Ojan from EBPREC. So yeah, the city with this recent round of funding, like Miranda said, they opened it up to limited equity housing cooperatives. And they realize that they don't really know how to administer the funding for limited equity cooperatives because they've never done it before. So they're actually contracting with UHAB, which is an organization from DC, to set up their own structure. So if you're thinking about wanting to do that at some point, now would actually be a really good time to get connected with them because they're figuring out their structure. They're like creating the framework right now.
To get connected with UHAB or with the city?
With the city, they're doing a process and we're going to be involved. So if you want to talk more about that offline, you can reach out to me too.
Awesome. Are there
Great.
other questions?
There was one final question. If the residents are undocumented immigrants, does that affect the access and/or terms of commercial and public funding?
No. As far as I know, no. Yeah, and I think the last thing I'll say about public funding is these Measure KK funds, which are the ones that we accessed for the 12th Ave project. It's a pot of money from the city of Oakland specifically for CLTs and limited equity housing cooperatives. It was $12 million and it took a lot of community organizing, a lot of leadership, I know from Oak CLT, to get that set aside. And that is a really small portion of the overall money that Oakland has for affordable housing that was set aside specifically for community ownership, and of course is a really small portion of the total budget that Oakland has. And these are just like really, they're choices that cities make, that our representatives make about how to allocate money. And cities have choices about putting money into affordable housing or putting it into policing. And there are ways for all of you to be involved in advocating, as we are, for putting more of putting money into community supportive projects like what we're all talking about today. And I think Sarah will get to talk more about that at the end. So. Okay, we'll do a little timeline. This is just an example of a timeline. Every project is different. Things can happen on very different timescales. And yeah, this is just one example, but to give you a taste of how things might progress. So in November at 12th Ave, residents reached out to BACLT. Staff went through, in part, the pro forma process that I'm going to go through with all of you to determine feasibility. We also called partners to see if lenders would be up for working with us, things like that. In December, we had determined that the project was feasible. We could make the numbers pencil. The residents, we had met with the residents and everyone had expressed interest in working with us and becoming a cooperative. And so we made a backup offer to the owner. They already had, they were in contract with someone else. So the residents spent a lot of that month organizing to get that other buyer to walk away, and were successful. In January, the owner agreed to sell and went into contract with BACLT. saying if we were able to find financing and meet all the financer's requirements, he would sell to us. In that same month, we applied to the City of Oakland for funding. We were lucky that they happened to have a notice of funding availability out. In February, BACLT applied for funding from LISC, and we were approved in that same month. So it was a pretty short process, at least to get the like thumbs up, we'll do this project with you. In March, we did an appraisal. We, this was like a light month for 12th Ave. We are also doing multiple of these projects at any given time. So we're probably doing lots of other stuff on somewhere else. In April, we got the official loan commitment letters from LISC, that's the CDFI commercial loan, and from the City of Oakland saying, we're going to do it. We're going to give you this money and do this project with you. In May, we opened escrow, which meant everyone's in contract. We've committed to buying, the owner has committed to selling, and the two lenders have committed to putting up this money. And there are closing requirements, so we have to do all these things before we can close escrow. So we spent May and June meeting those closing requirements. Is a lot of them, a lot of like testing and paperwork and bank accounts. And then we closed escrow on Thursday, and we are waiting to hear from the title office that we've recorded and that BACLT is the owner of record. Yeah. So developing a pro forma. A pro forma just means standard document. There are different types of pro formas for different like industries and activities. When we're talking about housing development, we're usually talking about 3 different budgets or financial documents. The first is the rent roll. It tells you how much rent you have on your units in the building. Your development sources and uses, which tells you how much money you're going to spend to acquire and do any needed construction on the building and where that money is going to come from. And then you have an operating budget. This is often projected out over 15 or 30 years, and it tells you where your money goes. What are all your expenses over time? So not just for the initial acquisition, but year to year. What are your expenses? What you need in order to start filling out your pro forma is you need to know your income. What's the rent that you're going to collect? And then what are your expenses? So that it's those ongoing things around sewage, electricity bills, all of that. And then also the acquisition and rehabilitation expenses. What does it require? What do you require upfront? And then you'll keep those critical limits in mind. And in this project, because we're using public and commercial money, we are keeping in the per unit subsidy and DCR. Those are the things we're looking to like solve for. So we're gonna do this. How can I? Okay. So this is the first document that we develop. This is for 12th Ave. These aren't the actual rents, but these are example rents. The first thing that you need if you're doing affordable housing development is you need to know numbers. The Department of Housing and Urban Development puts out these numbers every year saying what's your area median income and gives you a couple other numbers, and that shows you what the income standards are for the population that you're trying to serve. So we provide housing for people whose income is at or below 80% of the area median income. That's this row. And the way you calculate your rent cap is that the rent can be paid up to 30% of that income. So this figure is 30% of 1 month of income for a person receiving well, these formulas seem maybe off. 73,100. Yeah, that's what it is. $73,100 per year. So if you come into a project that's already occupied, you just fill out what you know the rents are, what you know the household sizes are, and you make sure that you're under this 30% rent cap. Here you can see where this number could go up to 80%, but it's far below that. And then if you have any vacant units, you can set the rent for those vacant units. And we've set them at $1,500 and $1,800. This page gives you your total income per month and per year. And the rest of the documents you go through will pull off of this document. We're also going to share like a blank version of this document with all of you so that you can use it on your own projects if you want to. Then you go to the development budget, sources and uses. So this is the one that I was talking about where you're looking at your like startup costs and where you're going to get the money for your startup costs. There's a lot on here and you could have expenses that are not on here. You can have even more than these. So we won't go over everything. The important things for us to look at are, these are your two like really big numbers, your purchase price and your structures is like how much money you're going to spend on rehab. We can see that if we take this up, for example, to 900,000, we have it going into the city of Oakland and our per unit subsidy goes up. So this is how much money we're spending per the number of units. And our limit for this project was $200,000 per unit. So a purchase price this high would not have flown. The other thing you're looking at is structures. And this is how much money we can put into rehab. There's a ton of rehab needed at 12th Ave. And in order to keep things healthy and safe. And as you can see, it's not just like what you are going to spend, but then that number kind of balloons with these other multipliers. So you take all of your totals for these different sections, and then you're on this page trying to make sure that the ask that you have of the city is below your per unit subsidy. And then you have your totals, and then you have your loan terms here. And based on your loan terms, you have your annual interest or debt service. The really important one is the debt service for the commercial loan because the public loan gets paid through residual receipts. It doesn't have traditional debt service. So we look at this number and we use the next page to check if it's doing okay. So this is your 30-year operating budget. In this top section, you have your income. Income is really simple. It's just your rents minus a standard vacancy rate that any lender will want to see at around 5%. That means we expect units to be vacant about 5% of the time each year due to turnover or whatever. Then, and this page is adjusted for inflation with these rates of increase. These are your sort of standard expenses. It's utilities, it's setting money aside to repair a roof in 20 years, things like that. We don't pay real estate taxes because we're a no equity cooperative, and all residents are low income, which is something we could talk about more. And you have your total expenses per year right here. When you subtract your income from your expenses, you're left with about $50,000. Then you have to pay debt service. This is pulling from the figure that we saw on the last page. So 45,000 of the leftover is taken out. That's this number, is taken from your net operating income. Then you calculate your debt service coverage ratio. So your lender wants to know that when you take your cash flow, let's see, yeah. So when you take this number, your net operating income, what you have left over after you pay your expenses, and you divide it by debt service, they want to see it above a certain number. Usually they want to see it above 1.15. LISC has created a product for preservation of affordable housing that is more accessible, so they let us go as low as 1.1. You can see if your expenses go up, say our insurance was twice $1,200 per year, our debt service coverage ratio goes down. So you have to bring your expenses down, or you have to bring the size of your commercial loan down so that you have less debt service. And this is like, yeah, so this is like the critical number. So when you're figuring out if you can get a commercial loan, if you are changing your rents, you're changing your expenses, which really you can't change very much because utilities cost what they cost, and you can't get this number to something that's acceptable to your lender, the project may not be feasible. Similarly, if the only way you can get that number down is by increasing the amount of money that you're asking the city for, and it's going up above the limit that you know that they have, the project may not be feasible. And the last thing I'll point out is once you have paid that, you have some cash flow, $4,000 a month. Now is when you pay residual receipts. So we split that money in half. 50% of that cash flow goes back to the city, and we repay the loan really slowly over time. We're paying our commercial loan $45,000 a year. We're paying the city $2,000 a year. It's a much more affordable type of finance. And then 50% goes into replacement reserve. So it goes back into the project. And it's another, like this replacement reserve number, it's another chunk of money that goes back into the house account, and they use it to repair a roof in 20 years or to add a new fence or something like that. And then the cash flow is zero. You've used it all. Any question? I feel like there could be questions.
Yeah, it's going back to earlier, I didn't want to interrupt.
Okay.
People had questions around the rent cap.
Okay.
And how that's assessed.
Yeah. So this 30% is standard. That's what HUD, if you're paying more than 30% of your rent, your HUD, your federal standards consider that, I think, extremely rent burdened. So you, as an affordable housing provider, you have to keep the rent that you're charging at a level that folks could pay without being extremely rent burdened or rent burdened. So if you, for example, were wanting to provide affordable housing to folks not at 80% of AMI, but below 50%, then, okay, my formulas aren't working. But if you were wanting to keep it below 50%, you would look up here. That's what HUD considers very low for one person. That one person would be earning around $43,000 a year, and you would have to keep your rent at that less than 30% per 12 months. Your rent cap would be $1,200. And we keep the limit that BACLT keeps for all of our properties is 80%. But there's lots of reasons that an organization would want to keep that limit lower. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, it does.
Cool.
And then somebody was asking about income before taxes or just adjusted income.
That's a good question. I think it's before taxes, but I don't know.
Yeah, it also does depend on the subsidy you get as far as what, you know, how you'd be able to calculate someone's income.
Okay.
And then another question, once the CLT gets the loan, are they obligated to serve certain AMI levels because of the loan agreements?
Yes. So we have agreements both with the City of Oakland and with LISC saying this will forever or for the period of the loan. Our commitment is forever. I'm not sure what the agreement says in particular. Serve households earning under 80% of area median income.
And if the CLT is intending to serve people that are at 40 to 60% AMI, so a lower income, could they just impose that?
Yeah, they could definitely. Yeah. You can also, like, we keep the limit that we have for ourselves at 80%, but you can see even these rents that we could set at over 2,000. We're thinking about what I live in Oakland, what would be affordable in Oakland. And so the actual AMI that we have set, this is affordable, these rents at 57% and 61% of AMI.
And then there was a question earlier, which I'll take. If a CLT plans to split title with tenants that would like to own a building in a non-co-op model, so a limited equity condo, are there unique considerations to take note of when seeking financing and creating pro formas? Typically, it's going to cost more money because you actually have to do the subdivision of the units. So that's going to be an extra expense that's on there that you'll have to consider. And then you'll also be looking at what is available for tenants to bring in down payment. Basically, in financing a limited equity condo, it's just going to cost more money. And so making sure you have enough of that gap subsidy between what you can get from a private lender and then what people may be actually bringing to the purchase itself.
And do limited equity co-ops pay real estate taxes?
Like, yes.
Yeah.
But they pay them individually.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's one more expense, at least in the limited equity, yeah, co-op.
Yeah.
Model.
Okay. Are there any more questions?
Okay. We went through the questions. Thank you for sharing those. I'll also say I am available. This is my contact information, Miranda at bayareaclt.org. And if any of you are looking at a project and you want feedback on a pro forma or to walk through something together, I'm really happy to do that with you. And BACLT is a member organization. Folks living in the East Bay are welcome to become members. You can join our newsletter and help us move land and housing under community control. So yeah, I hope to hear from you all, and if a question pops up later, feel free to shoot me an email.
Thanks, Miranda. There was somebody who was asking what 12th Avenue is selling for, the price.
Oh,
That's something that's being shared.
yeah, I guess it was in our pro forma. We bought it for 700.
700, yeah, so that was the actual number, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, and then I forgot about this question. We're going to go back to it. Go into detail about the strategies used to discourage other buyers from swooping in and purchasing a building that the tenants may not want to work with.
Do you want to take that, Lily? Whoever, one of the residents.
Wants to know.
Oh. What were you, I'm sorry, what was your question?
The strategies used to discourage other buyers, which I know are plentiful and a lot of work.
Well, it wasn't even that. We were already heated from our original landlord, Robert Bennett, and his fake attorney. So just with the way they approached us, we're feeling very defensive, because after that, we had brokers coming by, private brokers trying to figure out more information about the place, scoping it out, because we were on the list for an auction for months, almost a year actually. And the auction kept getting postponed. So we had leeches and lurkers and creeps coming by, and people trying to just sneak their way in. It became very stalkerish at some point because our name was on a list. So with that being said, we weren't really sure who was coming by, so we had to be very defensive from the very beginning. Robert also had private contractors come by and just, wanted to know like the size of our place, and it just made us feel really uncomfortable. But when the almost potential person came through, there was a lot of stuff that the new landlord didn't tell him about. And I disclosed the city report from different inspectors on a very detailed review on this place. And it made, let's just say it made him sick to his stomach. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm proud of that.
We did think too, we had already banned the broker from the building, and so he wasn't even allowed to step foot. And so when this potential buyer came through, we explained to him, yeah, we'll let you in the building, but he has to stay outside. So we showed them right away that we were united and that we were calling the shots. And we really pressed him. We gave him an explanation for why it was we wanted to follow the path of the land trust and how it stood to benefit us. And, we explained it to him kindly and patiently over and over again. So I think we used a carrot and a stick. We were really friendly, really engaging. We greeted every one of his contractors. I made sure that I got their information so that they were also emailing me quotes and things. We showed him the underside of the building and convinced him we needed a new foundation. He said that he was intending to live in the building, and we let him know how scary that would be for him if that was his choice. Lillian, you have something to add?
Yeah, I think one of the key points that might be for everyone to use was Christine had the idea of getting somebody to call and get the 263-page disclosure documents that they were handing out, to disclose all the problems with the place to potential buyers. So we had that document, 263 pages of problems, right? And not entirely problems, but almost all of it. And then when we were a little nervous about actually being too threatening or something with the buyer, so we were very nice about it, but persistent. And when one of the deadlines was coming down, Christine and I both sent him letters and just said, look, we understand that if you buy this place, you're not going to have any choice but to kick us out because, you know, he had actually tried to tell us that, don't worry, I won't do any repairs, you know, and we're like, well, that's not acceptable either, you know, and, but so, you know, he was trying to say, I'm a nice guy. You know, I'm a good landlord. And it's like, look, you know, we know how much repairs this place needs. We know that we're close to a red tag. We know that you would have to kick us out in order to make the kind of profit that normal buyers need to make, or, you know, so, and I don't know, it worked somehow, a combination of things. So he backed out, and that's what got us here. I called the land trust the next day, practically, or a couple days before. So, yeah.
Just so you know, these guys come with a script. The private lender who basically got the place on default, he said the same exact things to us. He came in with a really nice smile, but the devil was lurking behind his shoulder. And so he basically, with his actions, said, you know, more than his words. He came in with, he basically did a half-assed job. The repairs didn't even last 6 months. And once this new potential owner came through, he said the exact same words as the private lender. And it was scary because we knew that this young buck didn't know what he was dealing with. And when we tried to even get to know him a little bit, he became very withdrawn. And if you're going to be living with us, that is not the appropriate approach. So he wouldn't disclose any information about him. And so we became kind of stalkerish. You know, we became very curious about who wanted to live with us.
We came by his phone number and called him, and he was very surprised that we had his number. Yeah.
So, you know.
And we were prepared to like have everybody we know send him postcards saying, don't buy the property on 12th Avenue. Like we were ready to do whatever it took. And he seemed to get a sense of that, I think.
Yeah. But at the same time, we realized that after everything was said and done, he was exactly what we thought he was. We saw him about a couple of weeks ago lurking in our neighborhoods looking for a new potential place to, you know, spill his magic upon. And he tried to make it seem like this whole land trust wasn't going to work out, but we got it.
And I just thought of another aspect, which is, you know, we weren't paying full rent. We were paying like we hadn't been paying rent when this new owner acquired the place through the no foreclosure sale. But we were paying like, how much were we paying when they first came in? Like, anyways, anywhere from like 50% to 25% to 70% of our rents. And I think that was a compelling point to the buyers to sort of scare them off, because really there was no way for them to improve the place enough for us to, you know, ever consider paying the full rent, you know. So yeah, so I think that was discouraging for people.
And just a couple more questions before we move on, because we got to keep moving. First of all, was it challenging for the tenants to be united in this project? And then was there any other organized opposition to the tenants?
Say the first part again.
Was it challenging for the tenants to be united?
Yeah, it could. I mean, at times, yes. At times, yes.
Having a common enemy is very unifying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What was the second part of the question? Was
there any organized opposition to the tenants, like a landlord association or other groups outside of just the lenders and the broker?
No. Not really. It was just pretty much piranhas in the sea. Besides the fake attorney that was representing our original owner, he had many ideas for the place, and he was
well, you know what, I would actually, now that I'm thinking it through, I would say OPD was part of the problem.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Like our former landlord used them as his private security, and like when he experienced resistance, so usually it's me that would greet the police because I'm, you know, a woman and I'm white and I'm they experience me less threatening. But the first time my husband like had any interaction with the landlord went off and filed a restraining order and didn't even serve it, and then called the police the next weekend to have them come. And, you know, it was just really crazy. But yeah, I would say OPD was probably
scratch
part of the
that.
problem.
They were pawns. They were manipulated like pawns very easily. And there's our taxpayer money at work, people. So yeah. Any other questions?
I had defund the police is the,
Yes.
the next thing in the chat.
Yes.
Well, thank you guys so much. Miranda, thank you for walking us through
Broker.
the financial practice of and budget pro forma for a project, and the tenants for sharing their experiences. And everybody's saying good luck 12th Avenue.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah. So everybody please stick with us. We're going to pass it along to Ojan, who's going to talk about East Bay Prec's model, community capital, and resident equity. And then if people want to share information about themselves in the chat to connect with others that are on the call, please feel free to do that. Information about what you're focused on, contact information. Thanks.
All right, I guess I'm taking it from here. Hey everybody, thanks so much for being here, and thank you Miranda and Sarah and all the 12th Street residents for showing up and for the amazing work that you're doing. Super inspiring. Yeah, really cool. And yeah, thanks for taking 2.5 hours on your Saturday. So I'll try to breeze through this. And yeah, Sarah, feel free to interrupt me with questions because I don't think I can see the chat while I'm presenting. So I'm the finance director at East Bay Prec, which is a relatively new organization compared to some of these CLTs. I'm going to talk a little bit about the co-op, and I'm going to focus on some financial aspects of what we do in community investment and how equity works within the co-op. So sorry if you haven't heard about EB Prec, I might not explain everything, but I'll point you to more info if you're interested. Briefly, a little bit about who we are. Can you all see the presentation? Let me just double check I'm doing this right. Y'all can see? Great. So the top right here is a photo of our staff collective. EV Prec was born out of a partnership with the People of Color Sustainable Housing Network here on the bottom right and the Sustainable Economies Law Center here on the left. When these two groups came together, they started the working groups that eventually became EV Prec. We launched at the end of 2018 and are going strong. This is our mission statement: to facilitate Black and Indigenous people of color and allied communities to cooperatively organize, finance, purchase, occupy, and steward properties, taking them off the speculative market permanently. Creating these community-controlled assets, we want to empower communities to cooperatively lead a just transition from an extractive and capitalist system into one where communities are restorative and regenerative in all these ways: ecologically, emotionally, spiritually, culturally, and economically. So that's like one very long sentence overview of our worldview. But today we're talking first about access to capital. So we've had a lot of funding challenges as we've developed. Like we didn't have a professional real estate developer on our team when we started. We've had people with experience in it. We didn't have like a land trust veteran, although we did learn a lot from the various land trust veterans in the community. But I'm going to share like some of the different funding sources similar to what Miranda did. And then, like she said, I'm going to focus on the private sources that we've found. But first I'll talk about equity. Equity is sort of like, if you have money, it's your down payment, right? This is a typical part of how you purchase a home. And it's limited by intergenerational wealth and structural racism, as we all might know, right? Not everybody has access to equity to put their own down payment on a house, especially here in the Bay Area. So that's been a challenge for our community that we're serving. And for our co-op, we don't have a big, endowment that we can just invest into our properties. Then we have government funding, which is sort of the public funding that Miranda was talking about. And like you said, it depends on a couple of things. Political and public will is a big part of it, right? Our current local bond is running out. Measure KK, I think there's like a couple million more dollars in it, but there's not really any any funding after that unless we do get the city to make a decision. Like they could just decide to take money out of the OPD budget and put it into more affordable housing funds. But that's something that really, depends on the public and political will. There's also different levels of government funding. So the local funding is typically the easiest to apply for. I think somebody in the chat earlier mentioned LIHTC funding. There's new market tax credits. There's a lot of like federal level funding that's a lot more complicated to apply for. And typically you're, folks like Ebaldsey who are buying 100, 300 unit apartment buildings, they're able to apply for those funds. And government funding is pretty much always competitive. It's always limited. And there's definitely a professional barrier to entry. So as a group that might just be forming an LEHC, a limited equity housing cooperative, even if the city of Oakland says you can apply, it's really hard. Our application was 250 pages, and we have to show a certain amount of experience already developing affordable housing. And if you're a new group, you're not going to have that experience. So hopefully the city is figuring out a way to make it more accessible to groups who aren't professional affordable housing developers, because we know that what's happening right now is not enough despite folks' best efforts. Then we get to commercial lending. So we know there's a certain amount of structural racism in commercial lending as well, based on like credit scores and geography and risk, right? Risk is often, they often assess the risk of giving a loan to somebody. But given the structurally racist history of our country and the economic system in the country, if you don't already have a bunch of money, you're a higher risk. Or if you don't have a higher paying job, you're a higher risk. Or if you're, those are sort of legal analogies that now represent the history of structural racism. So they don't write down what your skin color is, but they use all these other risk factors that are tied to structural racism. Also, a lot of commercial lending have high interest rates, and high is a relative term, but even some CDFIs who are community financial institutions their job is to lend to frontline communities. They're talking about charging 6.7% interest rate, which is, that money, that interest rate is basically their profit or profit from the project that could be held in the community, but instead goes to the lender. And those CDFIs get their money from commercial banks. So it's all connected, and there's real challenges with commercial lending. Now we get to private and individual. So these three above are sort of your standard. There's a lot more structure when it comes to these three funding sources above. The private and individual funding sources are sort of the Wild West of funding. This is where people can get a little more creative, and it's like you're not regulated as directly by the government or by the commercial lending practices. So I'm going to talk not just about what EB does, but about a lot of different private funding sources here. There's what you call hard money loans. These are often called like loans of last resort, right? These are just wealthy individuals. They don't have a commercial lending company or a bank, but they have a lot of money and they lend it out to folks, and they take a lot of risks, but they charge a very high interest rate. So these are sort of last resort loans, or maybe you get it for a year and then you pay it back because you might be paying 15% interest on a hard money loan, or 20% interest. There's also venture capital, right? We all know venture capital in the tech world, but it also plays a big part in real estate. One of the problems with venture capital is that they'll give you a bunch of money, but they want to own half the company. And when you're talking about a community-owned cooperative, that's not a viable option. That's like totally antithetical to what we're trying to do. Then you get to accredited investors. So a cooperative or a nonprofit or business, you can have people from the community invest in you, but there's limits from the SEC that are designed to protect people from fraud, which is really important, right? We don't want a bunch of con artists to come and get us all to invest in their businesses and run away with it. But it also makes it really hard to raise money from everyday people. Accredited investors can invest. I think I have the definition here, right? Yeah, so accredited investors can sort of do whatever they want with their money, but they need to make like $200-300 $300,000 a year or have a net worth of over $1 million. So it's really limited. If you're trying to raise money from accredited investors, you need to have rich friends, basically, which is another like sort of barrier to entry here. Is like we don't all have rich friends who are making that kind of money or have that kind of intergenerational wealth they can pull from. And then there's exemptions. So this is like the light at the end of this very long and dark tunnel, where there's ways to get around this, and we're trying to be creative here. So there's the most common one used is a friends and family exemption. I'm not using the legal numbers, but if you Google friends and family exemption, you might be able to find this. Or if you can't, I can look it up. I'm not a lawyer, but I know there's numbers and letters that go along with these exemptions. The friends and family exemption allows you to raise money from your friends and family, basically. People who know you well enough, who know your business, or family members. They don't have to be accredited investors, and they can basically invest as much as they want based on the fact that they know you and they trust you, and the government says, okay, they can assess the value in that way. So that's an exemption that a lot of business owners use when they want to start their business. They say, oh, I need $50,000 to buy some inventory. Let me borrow some money from friends and family. It's, similarly, it depends on who you know, on who your friends and family are. So it's a lot easier for certain demographics of folks to use this than other folks. And then the last exemption I'm going to talk about is a cooperative exemption. So the Sustainable Economies Law Center actually passed a law a couple years ago that allows everyday people to invest up to $1,000 in a business if it's a California cooperative corporation. And that's sort of a game changer. Before that, unless you're an accredited investor or unless you're using this friends and family exemption, you could only invest $300 in a business, which it takes a lot of $300 investments to get to, say, $100,000, right? But if folks can invest $1,000 each, that means if you get 100 people together to invest, you can get $100,000. That could be a down payment for a home, for example. So this is the exemption that EB-PREC uses in order to raise funds from the community and avoid some of the pitfalls that come from some of these other funding sources. And we use it in collaboration with some of these other funding sources. So we don't totally avoid commercial loans or government funding or even trying to get some equity. But the cooperative exemption allows us to raise funds from the community, and I'll show you how that really allows us to make property more affordable and to make certain things more affordable. Were there any questions?
Yeah, there is one question. It's a $1,000 max period or per year?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so right now it is $1,000 maximum period. So I'm going to jump into what does an investor owner at EB-PREC look like. This is sort of a slide from one of the presentations that we give. We have an orientation that we do online like twice a month if you're interested in learning more about the co-op in general. But basically, investor owners is an opportunity for non-accredited investors, aka normal people, to join in on community control. So right now, using this exemption, anyone in California can invest. We have a form that you fill out online, and then we send you an invoice, and you can send in your $1,000 payment. It's a minimum 5-year investment term. So again, this is not a donation-based thing. It's actually an investment, but it's not an extractive investment. And that comes into play when we talk about this 1.5% annual dividend. Commercial loans can range from like 4.5%. It fluctuates with interest rates really low right now. It could be even lower, but they could go up to 5-6%. Hard money can cost you 15-20% interest. And that money comes from somewhere. That interest comes from the property and the rents that you're extracting from the people living in those properties. By providing a 1.5% annual dividend, we're basically saying, you're going to invest your money and we'll give you your money back plus inflation. So it's going to retain its value, but you're not actually like making, you're not extracting a profit from the community. And this has been really transformative in saying that, what is this expectation that you can just put your money somewhere and have your money make money for you? That's actually a big part of the problem. So we're inviting people into this non-extractive investment where you can take your money out of the bank or out of the stock market and invest it in your community. And you can get that money back while helping the community stay housed. And this money helps us leverage other kinds of money. So it allows us to get loans from credit unions or CDFIs, or apply for government funding, or work with people who are in the middle, who have a lot of money and might want to loan at 3%. Showing them that we've already raised a certain amount of money could really make the difference there. We are working towards doing other sort of exemptions with the SEC where people can invest more than $1,000. $1,000 is one share, basically. We're going to be offering more than one share soon, but we're still working on the legal frameworks for that. Part of what's so incredible about this $1,000 per person is that you don't need to like file a lot of paperwork or do a lot of things in order to make it happen. You can incorporate as a California Cooperative Corporation. We're not a 501c3 nonprofit. We're a California Cooperative Corporation, and that means you're automatically allowed to use this $1,000 per share exemption. In order to do the other types of exemptions that we're doing, there's more paperwork involved, and you need to have certain assets and that kind of thing. But this you can get started just with having 3 people get together, create a corporation, a cooperative corporation, and you can start raising money in this way if you want. And that's how we got started. That's why we're a cooperative corporation. Eventually, we're planning on doing more raising, but this was able to help us get our feet off the ground with as an organization that didn't start with an endowment or with an asset, which a lot of us, like, we don't have that nest egg to get us started. So I want to demonstrate what the power of community investment is, and like, why is this important? So there's 2 side-by-side examples here. One with conventional financing, where you have an interest rate of 5% and a 30-year term, right? The other was community financing with it. The only difference is interest rate of 1.5%. And this is actually a dividend rate, so it's actually gives more control to the co-op even then. But so the amount borrowed in both situations is $1 million. And the interest paid, you can go online and search for a mortgage calculator, and you can do all these variables yourself. So that's what I did. And the interest paid throughout the 30-year period for this 5% loan is over $900,000. So the total you're paying at the end of the 30 years is $1.9 million. Whereas if you're paying 1.5% interest, the total interest paid is just over $200,000. Right? So the total you're paying at the end of it is $1.24 million. That's a $700,000 savings over 30 years. Now, where does this interest come from? This comes directly from the rents that the individuals in the house are paying, whether they're the owners, the co-owners, or whether they're residents of a land trust or some other sort of entity. The money is coming from them to pay this interest. This was what Miranda was referring to as the debt service. The debt service payments are going to pay back the principal and the interest. So by being able to raise a portion of funds, even if it's not the whole $1 million, if you're able to raise a portion of the funds at a lower interest rate, it can really transform the affordability of the property, meaning that you don't have to, there's $700,000 less dollars that you have to pay over the course of your 30-year mortgage period. So it can be really transformative if we can bring enough money in through this crowdfunding. So now I'm going to jump into an example of our first project that we completed, or we did last summer, the first phase that we completed last summer, which is Co-op 789. This is a photo of a lot of the residents there and some of our team, and even Francis here from Northern California Land Trust. The 789 residents approached us when their landlord put the property on the market. They were like, oh crap, what's going on? I wonder if we can buy this ourselves. And they had heard about the co-op. So we worked with them, and we worked with NCLT to figure out how to purchase the property. NCLT, as a more established cooperative than we were, or a more established land trust, was able to secure government funding in the same way that Miranda explained through this Measure KK funding with the City of Oakland, and was able to also get a conventional loan. So the property was purchased, I think, in the spring of 2019. And we also knew that there was a substantial amount of rehab that the project needed that those funds weren't able to pay for. So EBPREC and the residents, we hosted a bunch of events, we published articles, we did phone banking, and we raised $200,000 for the rehab of the property, bringing the cost of that rehab down, right? Instead of paying a commercial loan, a commercial interest rate on that $200,000, we were only paying 1.5% to our residents or to our investor owners, making it feasible. So this is just a little chart showing sort of where the funds came from for the property and for the uses. So the purchase was about 1.35 million. Almost half of that came from, almost half of that came from the Measure KK funding. A little more than that came from this conventional loan with the 5% interest rate. And then below market sale, this is sort of just, it's a weird phenomena where the landlord wanted to sell it to us for 1.35 million, and we negotiated him down to 1.3 million, and he got this $50,000 tax write-off to basically say he's donating that much, which is something that, you know, certain folks will benefit from that. So that's what that means. And then the rehab, instead of having to borrow at this 1.5%, we're able to finance ourselves. I'm not sure if these numbers are 100% right on, but they're a ballpark in the right area. So I see a question. Are there any restrictions for a community using the friends and family exemption to generate community financing? I'd like to get a better sense of the pros and cons of the cooperative exemption versus the friends and family exemption, especially if the latter has no investment limit. So I don't think there's not limits that I know about a community using the friends and family exemption. There's certain things that you have to comply with to use that exemption. We've actually used that as well. So we've done both the crowdfunding, and we've also done a small raise where we had like 5 people who have been telling us, like, you know, we want to invest more. And we were like, oh, sorry, we can't do that. And then our lawyers checked in with us and we were like, oh, actually, it seems like we can through this private offering. It's like a private offering as the overall term for various exemptions, including this friends and family exemption. So yeah, like Christina said, it's limited to 35 non-accredited investors per year, but there's no dollar amount limit. So if you have 35 friends and family who have the funding that you need for your project, that's a totally viable option. If you have like a large community network of folks who each have smaller amounts, the cooperative exemption might work better. And you can do both. If you're going to do both, there's something that's called integration, where you need to differentiate the different funds that you're raising from the different exemptions. So yeah, I'm not going to explain all of that, but there is some complication if you're going to use both types of fundraising mechanisms. And Valerie asked per year for the organization or for each project? I think it's for the organization. The private exemption applies to the organization itself, not to the particular project that the funds are being used for. So next I'm gonna talk about what resident ownership at EBPREC looks like, and I'm gonna talk about it in particular regarding the finances. I know we didn't get super deep into what ownership looks like in a limited equity housing cooperative and some of these other ones, but I wanted to talk about what it looks like at EBPREC. So in addition to collective governance and that whole realm of things that collective ownership empowers residents, there's also the financial side. So resident owners at EBPREC build equity, similar to if they were to privately purchase a property. Not exactly the same way, but similar, right? So resident owners have monthly payments, which help the cooperative cover all of the costs of the property, including the debt service. And the debt service, again, goes towards paying these funds back, the amount borrowed and the interest payments. Those are combined, those are called debt service. And equity is a portion of that debt service. So the interest does not become equity, but the principal that they pay, the actual amount borrowed that they borrow back, is a part of their equity. And whatever those residents pay towards that equity is tracked within the co-op. And it grows with each payment that they make. So every month, their equity share grows a little bit. And that becomes their equity account. That account has an additional limited growth that is equal to inflation. So that's where it's a little different than if you own the property on your own. If you own the property on your own, your equity is going to grow with the market, right? And you could sell on the market to make a big profit. That's something we're actually taking a stand on and saying, no, we're not going to be selling on the market to make a profit, because that's why everything is so unaffordable right now. So if we're creating affordable housing, we want the residents to be able to keep paying monthly payments as if they were just renters, right? You don't have to have a big down payment as an individual. You don't have to have a good credit score. You can keep paying your monthly payments and start to build an equity account, start to generate intergenerational wealth for you and your family, where otherwise you would have been stuck in a renter class for your entire life, potentially. And that you can build equity. And we want to let that equity grow with inflation so that it retains its value, right? Your money is not going to lose value over time, but it's also not going to grow with the market and make it unaffordable for the next person. And ultimately, if resident owners ever leave, or if they pass on and they pass on their share to their beneficiaries, they can cash out their equity share when they leave. So this way we're, creating real equity building for the communities that have been systemically excluded from opportunities to build equity and wealth. And so I'm going to walk through a quick example of what that looks like. So for example, let's say in month one of year one, your monthly rent is $900, right? This is going to be made up of various things. Some of it is sort of in the budget that Miranda showed us earlier in the 30-year operating projection. There's certain things like maintenance and taxes and repairs and trash and utilities and reserves and management that are going to be sort of your unavoidable costs to some extent, right? They're flexible, but that's what you pay. That's one of the things that you have to pay. And then the second chunk, as I've shown here, is your debt service, right? So this includes your principal and your interest. One of the cool things about debt service is that it stays the same throughout the term, typically, unless you have like a special design of your loan. But typically, your total amount stays the same, but the principal grows over time and your interest drops over time. That's just how like amortization works. There's a whole another workshop we could talk about. So in year 10 here, in this example, your rent you can see has gone up about to $1,000. In the pro forma that Miranda shared, they had an estimate of the expenses, these expenses here, growing by about 3% per year, because we know that just cost of living goes up. Repairs are going to cost a little more. Utility cost goes up. Taxes go up. Your maintenance fees go up. So these have gone up a little bit, but your interest and principal have stayed the same, right? And remember, each month, this principal that you're paying is adding to your equity account. Let's say that we borrow this interest or this debt in a 15-year loan. That means in year 16, your rent is actually going to drop to $470 in this example, right? Because we have these costs are still here, right? We're still paying taxes, still repairing things, still paying for our utilities, but you're no longer paying debt service. This is what happens for homeowners, right? After you pay off your mortgage, you're no longer having to pay the bank. What happens as a renter is, you're still paying this, you still have the same costs as a renter, the property still has the same costs. But when you finish helping your landlord pay off the debt service, this $900 a month, this $600 a month becomes profit for your landlord. In EB-Prec's model, all these finances are transparent to all the residents. And so when we're done paying off the mortgage, those cost savings get passed on to the residents. So in this example, it's a 15-year mortgage. It might be a 30-year mortgage. We might even make a 40-year mortgage in order to make the property affordable. It's really, whatever, it's a case-by-case basis on the property. But whatever it is, after this term is done, in this example, I roughly calculated these numbers. They're not exact, but this person would have a roughly $100,000 equity account. And this account would grow with inflation. So it would be $100,000 plus whatever inflation has been since each payment they made, so that it retains its value. So I don't know if, I hope that that made some sort of sense. Talking about how EV-Prec is bringing equity for their residents. Let's see, so if somebody moves in after their mortgage is paid off, are their costs lower for the same equity share that the original resident paid? That's a great question. So let's say after 16 years, this resident decides to leave. Their share is going to be $100,000, which is what we had to borrow in the first place to purchase the property. Plus, it's going to have grown with a little bit of inflation, right? So let's say it's $150,000 now. In order to pay that person back, the co-op is going to have to finance that equity amount. So we're going to pay them out, and then the next person who moves in there, they're going to actually come in and they're going to start paying off a new principal and interest, a new debt service that's going to be their own share. So the new person is going to be building up a similar equity account from the moment that they start. And their equity account might be actually a little bit more than this person number one, because this has grown with inflation. But it's still going to be affordable because the market for rents grows so much faster than inflation. That might change. If that changes, we're in a whole new ball game, and like everybody has affordable housing, right? But right now, given that the market for rent grows so much faster than inflation, we're creating a middle ground where the person moving out is going to have built wealth, and the person moving in is still going to have an affordable rent and be able to build wealth for themselves as well. Great question. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I think I have one more slide. Oops, here we go. So last thing I want to talk about is profit versus patronage. I don't know if folks have heard the term patronage. It's any word that starts with patron is interesting. But patronage is a term commonly used in cooperatives that basically is a distribution that the cooperative pays to its members. If you're a member of REI, you will get a card once a year that says you have a rebate of this much, or a gift card. I don't know what terminology they use for it, but basically, based on what you spend at REI, you get a certain return, and you get to spend that money at the co-op again. Or I don't know if you can cash it out at REI, but it's basically a refund given to you. So patronage is a distribution co-op gives back to its members, and it's based on a portion of the profit that the business makes. And the tax rules, even, they see these profits are essentially an overcharge, and that's how we see it as well. So breaking down sort of like how you assess the profit of a property, any given property, you have your income, which is typically just rents. Sometimes you have another income source coming from a property, but in a simple version, it's just your rent. And then you have your expenses, which again is that sort of list Miranda showed us. You have your maintenance, repairs, utilities, taxes, your maybe landscaping, maybe you have other things that aren't on this list, right? Every property is a little different. And then your income minus your expense, your money coming in minus your money going out, that gives you your profit. And so in a typical, real estate, landlord, tenant structure, those are profits for the landlord. And in EB-Prec, we see these, if the income that you charge, if your rents are equal to more than your expenses, we see that as an overcharge of rent, right? In capitalism, you see that as profit, right? This is a businessman making money, business person. But at EB-Prec, we recognize like, oh, we overcharged you for rent. Your rents were more than it was to cover the cost of the property. So in EB-Prec, that becomes a patronage reimbursement back to the residents. So this is another way where like we are really trying to transform the concept of landlord and tenant to be co-ownership, where if any profits are made, they're going right back to the residents. And that might look like they go back into the resident account and they add to the individual accounts that the residents have to apply to their maintenance or apply to rebuilding the roof if it needs to be done. Or it might just go directly back as a cash reimbursement. So yeah, I'm happy to take any more questions. That was a real sort of pointed overview of certain financial elements of how we put this together at EBPrec. You can learn more at our website at ebprec.org. We're a membership organization too, and there's various types of membership, whether that's by investing or just becoming a community owner. And you can contact me here as well. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ojan. Actually, I do have one question. For the owners in the cooperative that are staff owners, where do salaries come from?
That's a great question. So one of the expenses here is a property management expense. I don't think I have it here, but it's, you know, management.
Management, yeah.
Sort of here. Right now, all of our staff expenses are covered by grant funding.
Right.
Because we're still in startup mode. But eventually we're hoping that a large portion of our staff expenses will be spent like managing properties and working with the residents. And so that will come from a property management fee. Which is, yeah, I don't know if it's substantially different in CLTs or other affordable housing organizations. I think since a lot of our work is around community organizing, I think, you know, the more grant funding we can get in the long term, the more we'll be able to do a little extra, because having it all covered by residents' management fees, like that money needs to be spent on staffing time to actually manage the properties.
Yeah, no, and it's similar for community land trusts as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so there was actually another point. Thank you. That reminds me. Given this formula here, basically, these expenses are somewhat, you know, fungible, right? If the residents take really good care of the property, if the residents like do some repairs themselves, or if they are really careful with their utilities and minimize their costs, or if they decide they want to, you know, take care of the garden themselves instead of having a mow and blow company come and spray pesticides everywhere, that's going to lower the expenses, right?
Having a company come and do it for them. We don't need no companies to do nothing. That's how we're keeping our costs down.
Exactly, right? And so in these models, if you have a profit-seeking landlord, they are going to reap the benefit of you saving costs. But if you're in a cooperative or a CLT or a limited equity housing cooperative, either any of these structures, you're able to benefit from your own cost savings. And it's good for us, it's good for the planet too, because it means we're going to take better care of the resources that are here. So that's just one other thing I wanted to touch on. And the property management is an important part of that too. EBPrec shares property management with the residents of our cooperatives. We don't want to just like tell people they have to manage the whole property on their own, especially if they don't know how to. We want to take care of the buildings and make sure they're going to last for a long time. But if the residents want to take on different components of property management, they can take that on, and that can reduce some of these expenses as well.
There's a couple more questions. We've got about maybe 5 minutes.
Great.
Do you want me to read them out? Can you see them?
Sure, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, does any of anything go towards building the buying power of EBPrec?
Not right now. So we really do want all of the equity to be going to the residents. At the same time, so when we buy a property, let's say its value is here. Let's say it's at $1 million. The resident owners, their value is going to be growing with inflation, right? So this might be growing at 2% per year, whereas the market value of the property might be growing at 5% per year. So the amount that we're setting aside for residents, like this is how we internally value the property. But if we're trying to show our increased market power, we have an asset that, according to the commercial lenders, is worth 1.5 million, even if internally we only are owing like 1.2 million to the residents who might eventually move out. So in that way, we do build some equity, even if it's not cash. It gives us some equity in the property that we can leverage. But no, we also don't necessarily want to like over leverage our properties, because each one of these properties, EBPREC is an umbrella cooperative with multiple properties. So we recognize that we can't leverage one property to buy others, and then if something goes wrong, it's a house of cards that falls down. So that's something we want to be careful about as well.
And then another question, where does the money that's on retainer to cash out equity when a tenant moves come from?
So it depends on how much it is. EBPREC has a certain operating reserve, and we might have enough to pay out a resident right away. If the resident's been there for 20 years and has a $200,000 equity share, we might actually have to refinance the property and like borrow another money from the bank, or even like get a bunch of new investor owners to come in to buy out that person's share. So it really depends. And I will say that as a new organization, EBPREC doesn't have the capital to promise our residents that we'll be able to buy them out within 30 days of them giving us the notice of they want to move somewhere else. So it's not going to be quite as fast as if you had your own property and you wanted to cash out. It's going to take EBPREC some time to come up with that money, depending on how much it is. So that's one caveat that we're putting in there, just because we don't want to promise things that we can't deliver. Hopefully we'll have a strong position, and we'll have a line of credit even that we'll be able to quickly cash out and allow people to like use that financial nest egg that they've built in order to buy their own property for their kids or whatever it is that they want to do.
And then last question for the both of us. How did NCLT specifically play a role in EBPREC's last purchase? Was the PREC model used to buy the improvements while NCLT purchased the land? So NCLT really came in and made the project happen. EBPREC, there's no like one person did it and the other didn't, but EBPREC was working with the residents, and we sort of created the project vision, but we didn't know how to make the finances work on our end because we didn't have access to the City of Oakland funding at that point. So NCLT came in and they said, okay, yeah, this looks feasible. We can make this happen. So they actually got the loans and they purchased the property. So NCLT owns the property right now. Our plan is to transfer the property to EBPREC at the end of 3 years, probably around 2 years from now, because we closed on the property last May. And part of it is working with the City of Oakland to recognize EBPREC as an entity that can purchase the property from NCLT and still retain the City of Oakland funding. Like I said, they're still trying to figure out how to work with co-ops, and they just brought in a contractor actually from DC to help them figure that out. So we're optimistic that it's going to work. EBPREC has been supporting with construction management and with resident training over the past year. So it's really been an awesome exploratory partnership, and also challenging in trying to manage the city bureaucracy, but it's been very fruitful. And ultimately, we've got these units affordably purchased in perpetuity. So yeah,
awesome.
And hopefully 2 years is enough time to figure out the city bureaucracy, transferring over the subsidy. Yeah.
Seems about right.
All right. Thank you so much, Ojan.
Thank you.
And the last piece that we'll focus on real briefly, because I know we're getting close to one, are, can people see my screen? Okay, just some policy and advocacy initiatives that are happening, that have been introduced in Berkeley and Oakland and the East Bay, and then also some statewide stuff that have the potential to support more collective ownership projects getting started and finding support. So as you've heard in the examples that have been brought up today, a lot of collective land and housing projects happen due to a landlord putting a building up for sale and then the tenants working together with partners in order to purchase those buildings. 12th Avenue residents have talked to you about how sometimes that's a really difficult process, and it only happens with tenants organizing in every way that they can, being as ingenuitive as they can, contacting legal support and building political and community pressure in order to get the owner to sell to them, or to sell to them and the entity, the nonprofit, the community land trust, PREC that they decide to work with. So policy that we're going to talk about today focuses on giving tenants actually clear options and support when the property that they live in is going to be sold. And that's the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. So in both Oakland and Berkeley, TOPAs were introduced earlier this year. And the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic on council not meeting as much, and also city budgets, has kind of slowed down these initiatives, but they're still happening. Campaigns are working to build community power around this, and there will be hearings later in the year to try to push these policies forward, even in the midst of opposition from the real estate lobby and others. And these efforts have been made possible by years of tenant organizing, the work of base building organizations, including Moms for Housing in Oakland, which the TOPA ordinance in Oakland is named after, and then community engagement and research by members of People, Land, and Housing Alliance, which includes groups like the East Bay Community Law Center, Urban Habitat, and various community land trusts, EB-PREC, that really care about fighting for long-term community-based solutions to the housing crisis. TOPA itself grew out of a protest and community organizing movement in Washington, D.C. in the 70s, focused on rent strikes, tenants having control over their buildings, having the opportunity to stay put and build equity. And so TOPA was introduced as a law in DC in 1980. And since from 2002 to 2018, which the city wasn't keeping records before that time, but from that time period, over 3,500 homes were preserved for DC residents, able to purchase as tenant associations to turn it into a limited equity housing cooperative, or partner with a nonprofit organization or another organization in order to keep it as an affordable rental into the future. So just a little bit more about TOPA. It gives tenants the first opportunity to purchase the home that they've been living in when the landlord decides to sell. There are some exemptions in Berkeley and Oakland, exemptions of owner-occupied single-family homes, and then in Berkeley, owner-occupied single-family homes with affordable dwelling units. And it specifically creates two new rights for tenants. So instead of running around like crazy, trying to organize, connect with the lawyers that you need to connect to, building all the political and community pressure to get the owner to pay attention to you, you're given the first right of offer. So the owner can't just go out to the open market. They have to first let the tenants know I'm going to be selling the building, and you have the right to put the first offer in. And then it also creates a second right. So the right of first refusal. If for some reason the landlord doesn't accept the tenant's initial offer and goes out to the market and gets a third-party offer, tenants have the right to match that third-party offer. And tenants can also assign their rights to a qualified organization, such as a community land trust, maybe even EB-PREC, an affordable housing developer, if they decide that they cannot or don't want to purchase on their own. And that could be, we want to purchase this, you purchase this now, and then we'll move it into something that is a cooperative in the future, or people could decide that they wanted to keep it as a rental. But there are opportunities for collective ownership models to be created through TOPA. And then both ordinances, tenants would receive technical assistance and financial assistance along the way to make these purchases possible. And that's something that we've also been talking about, the funding challenges around that, as far as what is actually available for city funding right now. But before we go into that, I just wanted to real briefly share a bit of the video that the Oakland campaign put together and that's out there.
I've lived here in Oakland for over 20 years. I'm really lucky to be a homeowner. Oakland started to really change in 2008. We lost a lot of longtime Oaklanders, especially where there were multiple generations of family members, and that's been our trend ever since.
I've been in Oakland for 12 years, and there's been several waves, and the foreclosure crisis, then seeing all the tent just proliferate in the last couple years, it just seems like it just keeps deepening.
Can folks hear the video? It's so-so.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to turn volume up. Okay, we'll send this out for folks to look at themselves because I'm not sure how to change the volume settings on this.
It really has like shifted the culture and the tone of like what Oakland has.
Still same volume, yeah? Okay, all right. Let me go back to the screen share before. Sorry, folks.
So look at the thing that Anna Baptiste wrote in the chat.
I thought I had, oh, there we go. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. To folks, you'll have access to the campaign websites for both the Berkeley TOPA ordinance and also Moms for Housing TOPA in Oakland.
For 20 years, I'm really lucky to be a homeowner.
It's on.
Oakland started to really change in 2000.
There's no more sound.
For 12 years, and there's been several waves, and the foreclosure crisis, then seeing all the tent cities just proliferate in the last couple years, it just seems like it just keeps deepening.
It really has like shifted the culture and the tone of like what Oakland has really been in terms of like a rich resource for immigrant and migrant communities. And to see that kind of get dismantled because of the housing crisis is like really, really heartbreaking for me.
In Oakland, we're 60% renters. Our housing stock is actually 40% owned by corporations. And for apartment buildings, corporations own 97% of our housing stock. Part of the problem is that major real estate speculators have been buying up homes here in Oakland since that foreclosure crisis. We have more cranes in our downtown than San Francisco, but what Oakland is building is mostly luxury units. And so there's a real crisis in terms of people being able to stay in their homes. What I want to see for Oakland, people who are renters, who have instability, can have the peace of mind of being able to permanently stay in their homes, and for our community to actually own more of those homes. The Moms for Housing Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act is really simple. It's really just creating a process whereby if you make a decision on your own to sell your property, you first give your tenants who already live in your property in Oakland who already call Oakland home, you give them the first opportunity to purchase your property. So Stanley and Marla, the goal of this legislation is to protect our people, because the people of Oakland, the teachers, the nurses, the single parents, the families, all of the incredible people who live here are really what make Oakland.
We have the resources. We have the opportunity. What we really need for you all is to exercise the political will to get this done.
You said that you're in solidarity with this. Come with us. Let's go there. Let's all go there together.
And it's really a moment of reckoning. People of color, immigrants, Black folks are the beating heart of Oakland and have been for a long time. And everyone who made Oakland need to be able to stay here.
And so the single most important thing that we should be doing in the midst of a housing and homelessness crisis is creating stability in our community. What we're really trying to do here is make sure that the incredible diversity of Oakland, as well as the history and the roots of Oakland, can be preserved through making our housing more stable, allowing more people to become homeowners, and really creating community ownership of our housing.
All right. Sorry, it took us a while to figure that out. Thank you for the help, folks. So, you know, one of the major issues is figuring out how, once these ordinances get passed, and all the effort that it's going to take to make that happen, how there will be access to funding for tenants to be able to purchase on their own or with supportive partners, with qualified organizations. Ojan and Miranda both mentioned Measure KK funding, 12 million of which was set aside for community land trusts and limited equity cooperatives. And there's other, you know, amounts of money from that measure as well that are available, but a lot of it has already been dedicated. And from the 12 million, there's only $4 to $5 million that's actually left. And when you're looking at Berkeley, we have a small sites program, and due to the small amount of money that was put there connected to a particular tax that the city has it connected to, we only have $1 million that is in that fund for next year, and it's likely going to be dedicated to a particular Bay Area CLT project, which is great, but that's just one project. And then we have Measure O funding, which is $135 million that the city of Berkeley had passed a couple years ago as well. But those funds, they're not going to be available again for another 2 to 3 years. And then there's funding from the county through Measure A1 that also, I just got word yesterday that all of those funds have been committed already as well. So it's really challenging because a lot of organizing and work went into passing those bond measures for cities and for counties. And there's even money that's available on the state level. But it's not enough, and more is needed in order to make these policies happen. And what made TOPA so successful in DC is when the city actually started putting money towards its Housing Production Trust Fund on a regular basis every single year. So now they're up to $130 million that's going into the Housing Production Trust Fund every year. And a huge portion of that is going towards TOPA projects in order to make them possible. And in order to support tenants that are lower income be able to purchase and stay in their buildings. And so that's the kind of efforts that are going to have to come alongside these initiatives being passed, or these initiatives kind of, you know, building and getting passed, and then, you know, more organizing work happening afterwards to create the acquisition funding and subsidy that will be needed to make collective projects possible. And there actually is, believe it or not, a statewide TOPA initiative that's happening right now. It's supported by a wide array of coalitions and community land trusts, community-based organizations across California. I just got word a couple days ago that there actually is a legislator that's interested in introducing something. It's unclear how long the legislation will be in place. But there were concerns early on that this policy would exclude tenant agency and decision-making in the offer process, but we've heard that this legislator is actually interested in keeping that portion in. So giving tenants the right of first offer and refusal, and then also opening up the policy for community land trusts and community-based organizations to work with tenants or also be able to purchase buildings. And again, what is unclear, you see that the Stable Homes California campaign is advocating for $500 million at least from existing or future federal sources in order to make purchases, but it's unclear whether that will happen because a lot of the federal money has already been allocated for other uses. And so there have to be some creative things that will happen on the local level to make this policy work, or a lot of pressure put on the state in order to use future federal funds that may come down for these kind of projects and acquisitions. This gets us to our final slide then. In addition to the advocacy that's going to have to happen around funding, the calls that have existed in the community for a long time, in Oakland led by the Anti-Police Terror Project, defunding the Oakland Police Department. So what does it look like? And this is a new thing that's actually being talked about that's gaining traction. What does it look like in talking about defunding the police, defunding from institutions that support state violence and extraction from communities, and investing that money in things that support community control, like housing, like restorative justice programs, like public health and social services. You know, the city of Berkeley, Councilmember Cheryl Davila is actually introducing a piece of legislation in Berkeley tomorrow that's calling for the Berkeley Police Department to be defunded by 50%, and that money going towards housing and social services and public health initiatives. So it's just the beginning of a movement to rethink budget priorities and also move things towards life-giving programs and programs that support community control and community investment as opposed to violence and extraction. So I just wanted to give an opportunity for folks in the chat, because this is starting to gain traction and moving now, to share anything that they know of campaigns that are happening where you're living, campaigns that are happening statewide that folks can connect with and get involved with. And I'm looking at the chat. Oh, Healthy LA, yeah. Actually, interesting enough, I also found out that Healthy LA has been successful in their budget advocacy this year, getting the city to set aside a huge amount of money for acquisition of rental properties and support of community land trusts and possibly limited equity housing cooperatives as well. So it could be up to $100 million or more. And that'll be something to build off of in other parts of the state as well. Hopefully taxing speculative behavior can happen so we can get more funding anti-flipper and anti-vacancy taxes. Yeah, and that's being talked about in Berkeley as well, and Oakland too, yeah. Looking into it in Sonoma County, nothing too concrete yet. Okay, and I'll be sharing information about these campaigns, and then also some efforts in Oakland and Berkeley as well around defunding the police. Are there any other questions? Trying in San Leandro. Great, thank you guys for sharing all these things. So next steps, we'll be sending out information from the presentations today, information about EB-PREC and community land trusts across the Bay Area, and also the California Community Land Trust Network for folks to get connected with, for financial and technical assistance, thinking through projects that you're dreaming about in your community, maybe your own home, maybe a building going up for sale that you're living in. And then of course, ways to plug into these campaigns that make it more possible for these kinds of projects to happen in our communities. All right, thank you so much everyone for joining us today. If there are no more questions, would love for people to share their information in the chat if you want to be connecting with folks, and we'll be sending everything out to folks that registered. Yep, and I can send out the information in the chats as well. Okay, thank you. And we'll also be sending out information about the next CCY workshop that'll be coming up in August. And thank you to Miranda and Ojan and 12th Avenue residents for participating today, and Marissa for helping with technology.
Thank you, Sarah and Marissa, for hosting, and for everybody for showing up.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Enjoy your Saturday.
Thank you. Have a good one.